So good afternoon, everyone joining us today. For those of you who may be new, my name is Sor Singh. I am one of the co-presidents of Science Policy Network Detroit. Today, we are starting the first in a series of communication advocacy meetings in collaboration with the Wayne State Government and Community Affairs Office. So before we get started with our guests, we're just going to run through the agenda for the meeting.
I love Teams and how slow it is.
So we're going to start by going over the calendar. Then we're going to talk about this action groups initiative that we are going to be starting. And then we'll introduce Elizabeth Kutter, our guest. And we'll have audience questions for anybody who wants to ask them.
And if you guys just want to pop them in the chat or when the time comes around, raise your hand. You can go ahead and do that, whatever you prefer.
So our upcoming calendar will consist of the series. So I'd say take a screenshot of this. Oh, Teams. So take a screenshot of this. It's also on our social media. So if you want to be a part of this communication advocacy series and really get the most out of it, you should attend as many of these meetings as possible, especially the best training series. And we're going to be taking attendance of those who attend all of these meetings. And your participation will determine whether or not you get to meet with lawmakers. So if that's what you want to do, I recommend you attend as many as possible. So Brianna.
Hold on, before we get into this,
Okay.
I'm just gonna, while you guys are speaking, I'm gonna pop a few links in the chat. If you haven't registered for the future meetings we're holding or for the action groups that we're about to speak about, please click the link that I put in the chat and you guys can register for that and we can start getting that going. So just keep an eye on in the chat. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, yeah, Brianna.
Okay, we are doing a really cool thing this semester. We're calling them action groups, and it's a very good way for everybody to get involved. So we are developing, well, we're in the stages of developing 4 action groups. One is going to be on lead exposure. The second is going to be on water quality or water injustices. So the water injustices including affordability, water shutoffs, and water quality. And then also air pollution and community violence exposure as a environmental hazard as well. And each group is going to consist of like an expert, members. So you guys are all members, and then community groups that is relevant to that topic, and then hopefully some community members. And each community or each action group is going to look a little bit different. What we're hoping to do is get grant funding in order to fund these. But if not, we're just going to go in and use whatever data and resources we have and develop tools for each specific action item. And then it's a great way for everybody to get involved. So I think, Shreya, is that Linktree have, like, if you're interested in a specific action group, you can sign up at the link in the Linktree, I think. And then, okay. And then you can show your interest in that. And once we fully develop that, by next meeting, we'll have what it means to be in an action group, all the details kind of like given to you of like what is expected of you as a member, how much you can get involved, things like that. But if you have an interest in a specific action group, we ask that you please sign up on the Linktree because we need to know how many people are actually interested in like what to like account for and what to expect. So yeah, we look forward to it. It's a way to do something.
And we're just going to quickly watch a video in case you are still kind of unsure of what we're talking about. Our co-president Sorb made this awesome video and you can share it with friends, family members even. And we're looking also, we have leadership positions available. So we're really looking for dedicated members like yourselves to really make a sustainable change within the Detroit community. I know a lot of participants here are part of organizations themselves that help the Detroit community, but if you really want to translate those skills and take them to the next level, this would be the perfect activity for you guys to participate in, especially being virtual. We can do a lot if we work together. So I would recommend signing up. Even if you don't want to be a leader, you could be a member and learn a ton. So please sign up if you haven't already. And we're going to check out this video real quick and then move on. Alrighty. So if you guys have any questions, you can always email us if you're unsure about what group you want to be in, or if you even want to participate, you can always email us and we'll email you back with a response.
All right, awesome. So I am very excited to introduce our guest today, Elizabeth Kutter, if you want to advance to the next screen. I'm very excited to have Elizabeth because she's very passionate about her work, and that was very clear when we met with her. We are very excited to learn from her about how legislation happens at the state level and the university's involvement and what we as scientists and students can actually do to make a difference on the state level. Just some background, she joined Wayne State's Government and Community Affairs team as Director of State Relations in May of last year. She brings a lot of experience from both the public and private sector. She served as the Government Affairs Manager for Henry Ford Health System most recently. Previously, she worked for the Michigan House of Representatives as Associate Legal Counsel and Policy Advisor to the Republican Caucus. She has a bachelor's in political science from Michigan State University and also a JD from Michigan State University College of Law. So as she's talking, if there's any questions that pop up to you guys about anything, you know, statewide level, statewide policies, Wayne State's involvement at the state level, please type them in the chat, have them ready for the Q&A session. But we're just going to open it up to Elizabeth, and we're very excited to learn from you and hear more about what you do. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I am going to attempt to be tech savvy and share my screen and share a little bit about government and community affairs. So I'm going to start at the beginning, just a little bit of sort of who are we, the Division of Government and Community Affairs, what do we do? How can we work together? How can you get involved? So I feel like those are maybe easy spots to start. and easy places for us to all connect. So first and foremost, a little overview of our team. Our Vice President, Patrick Lindsay, serves sort of as the lead on everything. So state, federal, internal, community, all of the above. Patrick is the guru, so please feel free to reach out. And all of our emails are listed, and I'm happy to share slides afterwards as well, so everyone has access to us. My colleague James is the Director of Federal Relations, so the vast majority of congressional work falls with him. Myself, I use state relations, which is predominantly Lansing-based work. My colleague Taylor does government health affairs, so you'll see her both at the state and federal level offering insights onto what the School of Medicine is doing, as well as health affairs generally across the university. And then our team members, Kieran and Allison, who help support all the work that all of us are doing. So please at any time, feel free to reach out to any of us. We are all here as a resource to you. And then really getting into the meat. So what is advocacy? Advocacy is a big word. It's one of those things that you can use in a number of different situations, but when it comes to state affairs or when it comes to lobby work in general, there's sort of three main types of advocacy. So there's reactive advocacy, which is when a piece of legislation or a policy is introduced, what do we do if it impacts us? So how do we react to it? A lot of that is really about just keeping an eye on things as they're occurring. So monitoring what's been introduced, monitoring what's happening with the rules, getting to know members of the legislature and understanding what they're pursuing, and then really looking through how do we create a university position on it. So parts of that are connecting with our internal leaders, so people like you, who are issue area experts on something specific that can help analyze what the impact to the university is, what the impact to students is, what's the impact to faculty, staff, and our surrounding communities. So first and foremost, we're always making sure that we're being prepared for threats that exist, looking out for things that could impact our mission, vision, and values. The more fun part of my job is proactive advocacy, which I think, especially with your subgroups, it sounds like there's an opportunity to really all partner together on creating proactive opportunities. So the big part of that is sharing information. It's taking research, it's taking foundational information, and then translating it into opportunities for lawmakers. So Michigan, as many may know, is a state that has term limits, which means members serve in the state house for 3 terms and then they cannot serve again. They serve in the state senate for 2 terms and then they can't serve again. You get a cumulative 14 years between the state and the house, or the senate and the house. But with that, it means there's a lot of brain drain sort of consistently at the legislative level. So when you're at this point in time, the beginning of a new legislative session, there's a number of members, like this year in the House, there's 28 new members who have not sat in on a state legislative session yet, who are looking for ideas. They want to be able to put in a bill draft that's new. They want to impact their community. They want to know, how can I change state law to reduce barriers? So proactive advocacy is really probably, in my opinion, the most fun spot to be. And it is really equipping legislators with opportunities to make change. Some of that could be expressed in things that we're doing right now. I'd say probably one of our big university proactive pushes is around the National De-Escalation Training Center, for example. The university announced that headquarters last May. We were really excited about the opportunity to look at ways to partner with the state, and it became an opportunity for us to share with legislators things that we're doing, ways they can help us be bold and do new things, and ways that they can invest in Wayne State that are outside of the traditional 4 walls of just higher ed. So that's proactive advocacy. And then the final thing is sort of what my parents think I do all the time is relationship advocacy. Definitely the perception of a lobbyist is that you spend the vast majority of your time drinking coffee and eating lunch and going to dinner. And while that might be one of the more fun things I get to do too, it is really important to accomplishing the reactive and proactive advocacy pieces. Having meaningful relationship with legislators, with policymakers, with leaders, with staff. I mean, all of those sort of things really help us accomplish our goals. So sort of like this right now, you're getting to know me. So if I ever come to you and say, hey, this piece of legislation was introduced and it has to do with some environmental impacts in the city, can you share some info with me about what this would look like, or what's the impact this might have on a community. Is this something Wayne State should support or oppose? If you've never met me before, you might ignore my email and think it's spam or like a phishing thing. But now you've met me. So now we have a relationship, and now you're going to say, oh, I know who Elizabeth is. I can respond to this. This makes a lot of sense. So even though that seems like the silly part of sort of what we all do, it is a really, really important aspect of making sure people have sort of a face to reflect when they're thinking about, okay, well, what's happening in Detroit, or what does Wayne State maybe need, or what's going on with Wayne State. If they've never met me before, they may never ask anybody, or something, negative. They may pursue something that has a negative impact on us just because they didn't know. But because they've met me or had coffee with me, because we've Zoomed or, connected over a mutual love of the Detroit Lions, then they feel like, we can have this really natural conversation about policy and legislation. So foundationally, advocacy really does come to relationships. It's about, building stakeholder groups and building coalitions around things. But to that end, that's how you sort of successfully navigate reacting and proactively pursuing legislation. In addition to advocacy broadly, there's a couple of ways that you can be really super successful in advocating. So first and foremost, I think the policy is the biggest piece. I think this group is probably more equipped than very many to really be thinking through, like, what is the policy? What's the impact? What does it do? What does it mean? What are the words that we're using? Where are we placing it? All of those specific pieces really matter when you're looking at a piece of legislation. So again, state lawmakers come from a variety of backgrounds. There's a number of them that are small business owners, individuals who come from an agriculture background. I think there's a number of lawyers. Once in a while, there's a doctor. It depends. Every session is different, but that really means that a number of legislators aren't experts on every topic, just like you and I aren't experts on every single topic. So knowing the policy is a place that we can really be strong. So being a resource to a legislator, helping them understand what the policy might look like, developing policy, and really making sure that they're using words right. The policy is a big, big piece. The second big piece is the politics. I think this is probably the most widely reported piece right now, and probably everyone on planet Earth is now an official armchair politico. So everyone is probably well equipped to participate in the politics. But some of our specific strengths, and maybe our teams in particular, are really looking at the politics in a micro sense and a macro sense. So really understanding what that means for our strategic goals. So parts of that are not just thinking through, who's the majority party in control or not in control. It's what member was given the bill, who introduced it, what committee did it go to, who the chair of the committee is, whether or not the chair gets along with the speaker, if the speaker and the Senate majority leader get along on a specific issue, if it's something that the governor decided that she wants to focus on as well. All of those pieces come into play when you're thinking through a broad advocacy plan, but the politics have a very specific impact. And even understanding, again, just the nuance of relationships between legislators is an opportunity to be able to influence the outcome of what's going to happen. And then finally, in terms of creating successful advocacy plans, the process. The process is probably the least fun and the more, I had a former boss that described it best. It's the sausage making piece. So it's the part you really don't ever want to know you see, but it has to occur. So process is similar to the politics in the effect that you're looking at things like what committee something went to, but more than anything, it's knowing some of the real specific details. So knowing how long a piece of legislation needs to lay over in between chambers, knowing the duration of session days left before something can even move, figuring out whether or not something was assigned immediate effect or not, so you can assess when or when not something may go into effect. But really getting the mechanics and understanding that piece makes you more effective. So the 3 Ps, the policy, politics, and process, are probably the most beneficial way that you can look at being successful on this sort of broad advocacy realm, is assessing each one of these: reactive, proactive, and relationship building, and utilizing the tools of policy, politics, and process to your advantage. So I might take a pause for a second and see if there's questions on just those really basic pieces of advocacy before we dive in a little bit more on some of the things that Wayne State is currently working on, and places where we can be helpful.
If you guys have any questions, you can type them in the chat or just use the raise your hand feature in participants if that works better. Awesome. We have one question from Zara. You can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask it.
Hi, so I'm a social work and public health student at Wayne State doing my master's. So I was wondering, I know that a lot of people in this Zoom are from different backgrounds. Is there a specific way that you get like multiple disciplines to all consult on the appropriate policy, or like, is there an organization that like makes all of those people available to do the consulting, or is it like an individual effort to reach out?
It's a really good question. So I can tell you from my personal experience that not every piece of legislation has every member of the public involved in it, but part of the major piece of the public process, especially in the state level, is that, you know, like we have to abide by the Open Meetings Act, for example. So legislation gets introduced, it's public, it goes to committee process, which is all a public process, and then it goes to the floor, which is again a public process. I think in terms of ways to influence that most successfully, I would encourage you to join sort of an individual background association or advocacy group. So like, for example, we are members of the Michigan Association of State Universities. MASU represents all universities in the state of Michigan. It makes sure that if somebody doesn't necessarily reach out specifically to me at Wayne State, they generally are going to reach out to the association and make sure the association is aware of something that may impact higher education. That association is probably part of a broader coalition on a really regular basis of stakeholders that are going to be influencing and informing policy. So I think first and foremost, making sure that you're engaging with like your own issue area association is really, really important to influencing the legislative process and being involved in those discussions and heightening sort of your involvement in what sort of policy areas are specific to you or that you're going to be able to influence and be a resource to legislators on. And then beyond that, it's our job and our duty, I think, as lobbyists and advocacy experts to really build broad coalitions. So to your point exactly, building out a really, really broad and diverse group of individuals to share information. And I'll use the De-Escalation Training Center as an example again. You know, it makes sense, obviously, to connect with the Police Officers Association of Michigan and the Fraternal Order of Police and the State Police and the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards. Those are really natural stakeholders, for sure. But there are stakeholders that go beyond that are important to involve in the conversation. So that's things like connecting with members of, even within Wayne State at the Center for Behavioral Health and Justice, making sure we're connecting with mental health experts, connecting with the prison system and other individuals who are involved in the pretrial incarceration and jails task force. So really thinking about, okay, there's your first level of specific issue area experts, and then there's maybe like a next level of people who are going to be influential on that discussion too. But it's my job to build a really huge coalition so that when legislation gets introduced, when it's pursued, I can say to a legislator, you know, I've connected with all of these different individuals, all of these different people have walked and weighed in on what's going on. So we know it's a really robust piece of legislation. That doesn't always happen. But again, first and foremost, I think getting involved with your issue specific association, and they are all over the place, not just for students, but for licensed individuals. Like, I'm an attorney, I'm a member of the American Bar Association as well as the Michigan Bar Association. Those help me connect on legal issues that come before us all the time. So I'd encourage you to join those groups because it does present opportunities to be really involved in the discussion.
Yeah, and just to add to that quickly, thank you, Zara, for that question. That was an awesome question. That's kind of what we're trying to do with SciPol is, like you said, we have such a diverse group, which is a huge strength of our organization. And we're hoping to kind of be that glue that links like someone like Elizabeth or James, who we'll hear from next week, about like policies at the federal level or the state level. So we can tap on our members and say, hey, I don't study that specifically, but we might have some members that study, you know, water quality issues. So we can kind of tap on our members. But thank you for that. Sarah has a question. Go ahead, Sarah.
Hi guys, my name is Sarah Lawson and I work with Wayne State, the Public Health Division with the Research Department. And what I see all the time is people really not understanding, and they are not aware of all the different organizations, that they can join that will make a difference. Okay, just like when I entered Wayne State for my master's program, I graduated already. But this is the first time that I am actually hearing about your group. So is this a new group that just started or have it been around?
We are a brand new group, so you didn't miss much. We started over the summer in 2020.
Okay, because even in the summer of 2020, I didn't hear anything about it, but I'm glad to, that you guys sent the email out. So now, are you getting this information out to the general public or just within the Wayne State community?
Yeah, we're trying our best. If you have any suggestions for how to reach a broader audience, we are also a Wayne State registered student organization, but we have faculty, staff. As you'll see, we have members from many different disciplines, and also part of the broader community. We'd like to open it up as well. So thank you for joining us. Please email us if you have any suggestions, or in the chat, please, we welcome that.
All right, thank you.
I can keep talking about some of our Wayne State priorities too, and maybe that'll transition. And I think those are all really good points in terms of finding a specific issue area membership, but then Hillary makes a fantastic point. This makes it really easy for someone in my position that is a registered lobbyist to say, hey, a piece of legislation was introduced that could impact the city. I'm not really sure who else to reach out to. Do you have someone at SciPol that doesn't mind sort of reading this over, weighing in a little bit? Having those sort of groups is really, really helpful to being exactly that, being a resource to legislators, which I think maybe I'll skip this and we can come back to it. One of the biggest ways you can be involved is to be that resource, be an issue area expert, be somebody who's willing to share your research, share your information, and share your opinion and your position. When you're thinking proactively, I would assume that many of you are encountering on a really regular basis places where you see barriers to success in state law, state policy, the way that money is being allocated or appropriated, things that are happening where, oh, well, if we only had X, we could be more successful here. Or if only, I'll use the jail and pretrial task force as an example in this one. If only there were social workers in prison settings more frequently. If only there was a social worker in an ER to help offset some of the things that are going on in the behavioral health realm. All of those are things that someone may interact with in their studies, in their research, or in any number of sort of work settings where a legislator who doesn't have a background in healthcare, doesn't have a background in health policy or in corrections policy or in law enforcement policy, they're never going to see that. They don't know. So being somebody who's willing and able to say like, hey, I see this barrier, I see this opportunity where we can make improvement or we can benefit people. I think this is how we could help is fantastic. And then working with somebody like me or someone sort of in the legislative realm that does like the process piece can help you figure out, okay, where does this go in state law? The Michigan compiled laws are really vast. They're really confusing. The legislative language is hectic, to put it lightly. But that's my job. My job is to help you navigate where things might fit in state policy, or be creative about how an appropriations process might work, or where a piece of budget boilerplate language might make sense to fit in, so that you can think through how do we effectuate an actual opportunity, or how do we remedy a barrier that's occurring. I will put in a regulatory remark on this one. Be aware when you're doing all of this work of state lobbying rules. So obviously, if you're interacting with a state legislator, the goal being to influence legislation or an outcome of appropriations, you could potentially trigger lobby laws. So just be mindful of those, I think, all the time. The university also has a policy on contacts with covered federal and state government officials. So be mindful of those things. But again, the purpose of our department, of our entire division, is really to help facilitate those opportunities. So, obviously we are consistently looking for ways to make sure that the university voice is heard, that we're influencing change at the state level, that we're being a resource to legislators so that they understand what's going on in our community. They understand what our research means and does. They understand our impact on the economy, and that they really see what we do as a major benefit to them. I think Hillary shared with me a couple different times, and I can attest to it from my own personal experience too. There is sort of this constant back and forth. So who is the expert? Do we trust them? Part of my job is to build some of that trust so that I can say, you trust me, I trust Hillary, they are the expert. Let me help you connect with them. Let me help them share with you where research really could have an impact or where we've seen opportunities for change to occur. And I'll go back to our priorities right now, because I think that does speak to it. So we right now are advocating around 5 predominant areas as a university. So first and foremost, obviously preserving and expanding investments in higher education. If higher ed's not affordable, if it's not something that continues on the public sector, it's a major detriment to the city, it's a detriment to the state, it's a disservice to our residents. So always we're connecting with legislators to make sure that they know what we're doing, know what we're up to, that we can share the things that we do, so they do continue to view us positively as a resource. A big piece that I've talked about a couple different times is supporting community and police relationships through access to training. So the De-Escalation Training Center continues to be a very foundational element for us to advocate on, but it's a good example of being creative when we're looking at policy priorities to focus on things that fall outside of the traditional 4 walls of education, because it is a spot where it gives us an opportunity to build that resource relationship with legislators and have them see us as an entity that, yes, provides public education, but also provides all of these community services where we can be a collaborative team member with them. We advocate very consistently on funding opportunities for medical students. And I'll speak on this one really briefly because I am not the expert on my docs, but we do consistently look for opportunities to make sure that our medical students have residency programs and slots available to them. My docs is pretty unique because it is a collaborative effort. So it's not just Wayne, it's us, Central, Western, and Michigan State University. And it encourages students in particular to pursue specialties in medically underserved areas. So again, something that really benefits our communities as well as our students. The last 2 are really, again, pretty broad in terms of advancing policies that support and foster research. I think that's probably the best place that we're all going to be able to connect moving forward. And I really am excited and looking forward to being a resource to everyone on this group, but also that I hope you guys don't mind being a resource for me too. So advancing policies that support and foster research really means making sure that legislators know where we are so we can advance sort of proactive new policy ideas. And pieces of that are really making sure that we're connecting on a regular basis. So seeing legislators regularly, letting them know when we do new things, sharing information with them, and making sure that they're not pursuing legislation that could hinder our ability to continue offering all kinds of broad initiatives. And lastly, ensuring we're able to achieve our mission, vision, and values is really just about making sure that we're able to be a public 4-year institution that, again, really offers affordable education to people across the state and across the country and the world. And I will stop there again and maybe look to you, Hillary, too, if there's things that you want me to cover or chat about, or if there's more questions too.
No, I think that was great. Brianna, Shreya, Saurav, if you guys have any questions as well. I think one thing I was thinking maybe just briefly is if you could hit on some of the issues right now and if there's anything that we as an organization can do. You can also answer that later, so kind of up to you.
No, I think now would be a great time. So I'm going to actually maybe focus a little bit on the state of the state because I think it's probably the most recent and relevant piece in terms of really looking at what the governor is laying out as her priorities for the next year. That's going to be really our guidepost. So I don't know that everyone had a chance to watch it last night, but if you did, kudos to you. I'm glad that you participated. If you didn't, she hit on a couple of really big issues, which I think speak really broadly to some of the areas that you guys want to focus on and maybe opportunities to weigh in and connect with a couple of specific legislators. So first and foremost, she talked a lot about rebuilding our economy. I think as everyone knows, COVID's really hit the economy hard. It's hurt a lot of businesses. It's hurt a lot of people. So looking at ways where we can work together to rebuild the economy, produce new jobs, encourage people to get back to their jobs and get students back in school. She focused pretty heavily on the economy and then Second to that, supporting schools and staff. She did announce a new grant program for a number of teachers and support staff, and refocused again on making sure that there's an in-person option for instruction in all K through 12 schools by March 1st. Again, really is going to be dependent on some of the vaccine rollout, testing, accessibility, contact tracing, all of the above, but big push to get kids back in school. Sort of on a smaller scale, she did spend a little bit of time talking about prescription drug prices. Yesterday, her task force on prescription drug prices, tripping over my words, released their recommendations for the coming couple of years legislative sessions. A number of those really focus on transparency. So making sure that businesses are sharing information about R&D, sharing what the costs are for marketing. Prescription drugs have a tendency to be a hard one for states to regulate. It's really falls more in the federal realm, but it is consistently one of the most talked about issues. Everybody, I think, was very well aware of the skyrocketing price of insulin. There were a number of other drugs that came out sort of short order after that. And this discussion is not new, but it is new in the effect that there's now a pretty good legislative roadmap. So her call on the legislature was, please take the task force recommendations and implement them. Pass law, make sure we're doing the best that we can at the state level to address every area where we can possibly push prices down and ensure that residents have access to affordable drugs. And then the ending the pandemic speaks pretty broadly. I think everyone has heard that ad nauseum, so I won't spend a ton of time on it, but her big push is to make sure that we're continuing to vaccinate people. I think the goal is to get 70% of individuals age 16 and older vaccinated as soon as possible. To date, she has issued 800,000 vaccinations across the state, which is a pretty good number. If you are interested in sort of the constant COVID data, the state does keep a pretty comprehensive dashboard that updates daily on vaccinations being given, contact tracing information generally. And they do also include links, I think, for when you can sign up for your vaccination. Finally, I think the area that probably fits best with our group is investing in infrastructure. She spent a really good amount of time talking about not just infrastructure like local roads, but really about clean drinking water. So making sure that we're really assessing clean drinking water. She really called on the legislature to pass the Michigan Clean Water Plan, which is a $500 million investment in water infrastructure so that communities do have access to clean drinking water. Specifically, I think in that area, you're going to see a couple of legislators pop to the top of the hill when it comes to being really engaged in that. New Representative Rep. Ayash, who is in the Detroit area, he took over former Representative Isaac Robinson's seat late last term, but also was reelected and filled in the full term this year too. I think in addition to that, Senator Chang, who sponsored Senate Bill 241 that you guys were engaged in last year, is another member you're going to consistently see talking about environmental stressors, action around sort of environmental justice generally, but those two members in particular are people that you're going to really see talking a lot about infrastructure. Water was a big piece of it, but like I mentioned, local roads continues to be a portion of it too. I think as many people have heard, the governor was big on the fix the damn roads. So last year they spent a lot of time doing a bonding proposal to make sure that we could finish a number of state trunk lines and bridges. That money doesn't necessarily trickle to your average locality. So her call this time was really more about giving locals more flexibility so that they can fund projects too, so that we can continue to address crumbling infrastructure, because it's not just state roads that are in trouble, it's every road. So those were probably the biggest topics. I think the overall theme that you probably saw from her was bipartisanship, which unfortunately is kind of ironic because yesterday around 13 of her most recent appointees were denied. A number of appointees at the state level, similar to the federal level, are at the advice and consent or at the consent of the Senate. So if the Senate decides they don't approve them, then they don't approve them. Of those 13, I would say the vast majority were people who had a political connection, and the legislature was making a very distinct stand about their continued sort of displeasure with where the governor's been on the pandemic response. I think it's probably not surprising to anyone that there's been continued turmoil around when restaurants can have inside dining. I think there's a lot going on generally about high school sports and whether or not individuals can play contact sports inside. There's a lot of disagreement between the governor and the legislature currently at the state level. And that kind of came to a head yesterday when the Senate declined 13 of her nominations. I was impressed. I think that she continues to come to the table. I think her address was very similar to the tone that was set by the president in his inaugural address. You know, it was one of hope, one of opportunity to find common ground, one of looking for opportunities to really set aside differences. And finally, she did announce sort of a road show that she's planning to go on, I think later this summer, where her goal is to speak with Michiganders across the state and really think through, like, how do we reinvest in common ground? How do we find places where we're more alike than different? And how do we pursue goals that fit into that? So I think when it comes to major issues that are occurring right now and places where, you know, opportunities lie, the governor put it out there that infrastructure is going to be really important to her, water infrastructure in particular. So when you're looking at clean drinking water, issues with lead, environmental justice broadly, you've got a friendly ear in the governor's office. They are looking for new ways to combat that, and they're going to be looking for ways to be sort of creative and bipartisan in finding solutions in those realms too. And like I said, I think Senator Chang and Representative Ayash are going to be really big in those conversations, but they're only two people. You know, they need more than two people. They need more than one House member and one Senate member to get these things done. And they'll need to find Republican champions too, especially considering the state legislature currently is Republican majority in the House and in the Senate. They're going to have to find champions that are willing to support those bills, and they're going to have to work with leadership to make sure that things can get to the governor's desk, and the governor and the leadership are going to have to figure out a way to get together so that she'll sign what they put forward and that they put forward something that fits within the parameters of what the governor is looking to accomplish.
That's awesome. And that's kind of another call to join the action groups, because we have a lot of people who are interested and very passionate about these different topics, and we would like to involve community voices. That's kind of one of our core pillars. And if you missed our water panel over the fall, check out our YouTube. We've got a summary of that event where we brought experts from Wayne State and members of the community together, namely we the people of Detroit, to talk about these issues. And these issues aren't going away. That's something that Elizabeth, you're totally right about. So Elizabeth's office is wonderful because they know those, the politics and the process, as you pointed out, in ways that we can actually make a difference. So join the action groups, definitely, so we can work with them. That's part of why we're here, is to learn how to communicate how we can actually make a difference and take all of this passion and this scientific understanding we have and actually do something at the state and federal level. So yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. That was great.
Yeah, you're so welcome. And thank all of you guys. Like, being passionate is really important, and being willing to share your experiences and share your information makes a huge difference. I mean, I'm a lobbyist by trade. It is my job to talk to legislators all of the time. But when I come to them and say, hey, I want you to talk to somebody who's super passionate about environmental justice, we have an idea for you, hearing from you is going to be more meaningful than me any day. My job is to open the door and help you accomplish the task of getting in there to talk about what you're passionate about and to talk about barriers that exist and to share with them where there's opportunities to make major change. So, I mean, utilize associations and groups for sure, but please utilize us too. Work with us. We're happy to be here for you guys. I'm excited about being a small portion and sliver in what you're doing. This is just, it's a fantastic opportunity to connect with legislators.
For sure, agreed. I just had one question myself. I've been trying to work on being more knowledgeable, and that's one of my goals for this semester, is to build my knowledge base and just like have the facts straight, have the information, so I'm more of a credible person in this organization. And I just was wondering if you had any advice as to not only me, but all the members here, how we can expand our knowledge in these different areas of expertise. And like, let's say I'm not very knowledgeable about lead exposures. What would you recommend I do in order to, I guess, read up and learn and become an expert, get the facts, get the correct perspectives on that issue?
Whew, that's a good one. So I'll give you maybe an example. How about that? So my area of expertise is legislative processes and policy and politics. I figured out that I cared a lot about that as a random intern when I was in college, and I just randomly fell into an office and decided this sounds cool or whatever. Started working in that office and reading legislation and recognized that legislative language was not my strong suit, and did the same thing as you, like, how do I expand my knowledge basis in this? And, you know, everyone is going to be different. For me, it was looking into law school and going to law school because I wanted to know how legal language works. And I really wanted to know the intricacies of what language means, because law is really nuanced, and state law and federal law to the same effect, very nuanced. So I wanted to put myself in a position where if I was going to be writing state law, I knew how to use words the best way that I possibly could to make sure that they have the meaning that I espouse that they do, and that they actually reflect the intent. I didn't want to be vague. If I was writing things, I wanted to make sure that people were going to benefit. So that's what I did when it comes to looking at legal language. That's not to say that I think you need to go to law school to get good at lead exposure. But I think that there are opportunities to engage in a number of different things. So the state, like I mentioned, does task forces on topics all the time. They usually convene experts from around the country to discuss issues like lead exposure, water quality, prescription drug prices, access to drugs, criminal justice reform. So I'd encourage you to do some generic Googling on state task forces. I can't recall off the top of my head whether in the time following the Flint lead exposure issues, I would assume that there was a task force, but I can't recall off the top of my head right this second. So there very well may be some really fantastic resources in terms of people saying, this is what happened, and this is what happens when you're exposed to lead. I think Dr. Mona is probably a fantastic resource on that specific issue. I would assume that she's put out some fantastic scholarly articles around lead exposure and what that means. Being somebody who thinks that having more information is always better than less information, I'd encourage you to find scholarly articles, take in information from a broad range of news outlets too. So like everyone else, I try to make sure that I'm getting information from both sides of the spectrum so that I can be, as well versed as possible, because part of, the relationship building, part of the proactive advocacy and reactive advocacy is kind of being able to test the room and know the tone to use. A lot of that is, making sure when you're walking in that you don't step in it on accident. So knowing the audience, knowing what you're going to see, but taking in a broad amount of information. So maybe that's not super helpful, but I'd encourage you to find issue specific things, because the facts matter. Whether people are trusting of experts or not right this second, that's a tough one to call. But having the facts is really important. Translating the facts is the big piece to making sure legislative action happens, which I think you guys are all really in a prime position to be able to do, to translate the facts from not just a scholarly article that someone shared, but to, here is the scholarly article, here's the research that supports it, here's the evidence and the base practices that we've pursued that really show that this works. And now you know me, so you can trust me. So building, I think, all of those pieces together really helps you be successful in this.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I definitely feel like I need to read more and also listen more, whether it's like podcasts or different news outlets. And I need to find something that touches more on the local side, because nowadays news is all talking about on a national level. And I feel like some of these important local issues that are affecting Detroiters are kind of sitting there in the shadows. So definitely need to read up for sure.
When it comes to state politics, there's probably two primary news outlets that deliver on very state-specific political news, and that would be MERS, it's M-I-R-S, MERS News, and Gongwer, G-O-N-G-W-E-R. Those are probably the two big state-based political news outlets. So if you're interested in those sort of things, I'd encourage you to take in information from them. MLive also does a fantastic job when it comes to state-specific work. When it comes to Detroit and economics, I'd say Crain's is probably the best place to get economic and business news in Detroit. The Michigan Chronicle does a fantastic job for Detroit-based news. Both the Free Press and the News are fantastic when it comes to local-based stuff. But you're right, it's hard to consistently filter through, what's really happening or what's going on. But again, I think it probably speaks to the benefit of creating a group like this is having, you know, multiple voices in one room, having a lot of people that are out in the community and talking with other people, and hearing from other people. You get to trade more stories. You know, it seems odd, but you know, like a lot of our jobs are all trading on information. So if I don't talk to anybody, I don't have any information.
Yeah.
If I talk to lots of people from varying backgrounds, I find out a lot of different information about, you know, like what is the governor's priority for this year? What does the Senate Majority Leader want to do? Is he going to pursue, you know, a community college bill again? You know, his consistent priority has been allowing community colleges to offer a 4-year Bachelor of Science and Nursing degree program. You know, knowing that kind of information helps us prepare an advocacy plan around, okay, how do we converse with him on this topic? What do we design that makes sense to show him the research around why that doesn't make sense or why it does, or what works best for Wayne State? How do we share information with him about our nursing programs? How do we make sure that he knows that we offer classes in Jackson where his district is? You know, all of those pieces go into having the information early, developing a plan around it, and then utilizing that information to really hone in on what ways you can speak to somebody that they're going to be most receptive.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. And I just want to thank you for your exceptional presentation. You are an awesome speaker. So thank you so much.
You guys are way too kind. I am here to serve. So to whatever degree I can be helpful to anybody, you know, please feel free. I've had our emails up for a little bit, and I saw Taylor post in the chat too. If you have more questions about my docs or, you know, generally about health affairs, please feel free to reach out to Taylor. She is an incredible wealth of knowledge when it comes to all things health affairs. So please feel free to reach out to all of us. I know James, I think, was planning to be on today as well. So, and you'll see him next time. So I don't have to speak too highly on that right this second, but you know, all of us are here to serve. We want to be helpful and share our work. It's exciting work that we get to do, and advocating on behalf of the university is truly a privilege.
For sure.
James wanted me to let you know that he's on the call.
Hey, James.
There he is. Yeah, we have some more time if anyone has any questions. We have a really diverse group. Again, I'm sure there's something, you know, in the area that you study, if it's public health or chemistry or physics or medicine. Feel free to take advantage of Elizabeth being here.
Well, and I hope it's okay if I take advantage of all of you guys too. You know, we're still early in the session, so legislation is really, really slow to roll out, you know, unless it's something that's being reintroduced, which you'll typically see in the beginning of a legislative session. And we have seen, there's not a whole lot yet that's occurring that's really new. Each of the chambers typically puts out sort of a roadmap of what they're planning to do and what their goals are, but broadly, again, like the governor mentioned last night, COVID has really taken the air out of a lot of proactive policy making. So, you know, a lot of things have been really focused on how do we restart the economy? How do we manage vaccinations? How do we make sure that we still have the funding we need for PPE? How do we make sure that our hospitals are successful right now? So I don't say that to suggest that there aren't topics that are important that don't fall within that. But I would say is, again, as you guys are looking individually at developing an advocacy plan, or in each action group developing, you know, a couple of top tier items that you want to advocate on, think, you know, how does this fall into the COVID plan? How does this fit into COVID recovery? Because I think that's going to be a big part when we're advocating proactively in the next 5 years, frankly, is how does it fit well within the recovery plan? Where does it help the economy? How does it help kids get back any losses that they may have suffered from doing online learning in a K through 12 sphere? You know, how does this help make sure that people have mental well-being again? You know, there's been a lot of people that have been impacted negatively by the pandemic and by being isolated. You know, how do we make sure that our nursing home residents are doing okay? And all of those pieces, I think, are going to be really important. So again, making sure that you're looking broadly. And I think the earlier question about how do legislators do that, part of it's on all of us. The onus is on us to be engaged and to be a resource to legislators, because they don't know what they don't know. They can't be experts on everything. They're people just like us. You know, it is intimidating, I think, sometimes to think about speaking with a legislator or talking to a legislator or presenting an idea to them. But foundationally, they are a regular person that is passionate about policy just like you, and decided my passion matters enough that I want to represent my community at the state level or at the federal level, anybody can do that. I encourage you, if you are interested in civil service, that you should pursue being elected. It is an incredibly awesome calling, and they are just people. They're just regular people. They want to do the best thing that they can for their community, and having you be able to share information with them makes them better too.
Awesome. All right, well, for the sake of everyone's time, I'm just gonna go ahead and share our last few slides. If Teams will cooperate with me. All right. Well, thank you again, Elizabeth, for your remarkable presentation and just for sharing all that valuable information with us. I think we all really needed it because we don't really focus on state as much as we should. And so if any of our audience members here have any additional questions that they didn't get to inquire about, feel free to email Elizabeth or any of the emails that she shared with you.
I can't thank you guys enough for having me and for being willing to engage on this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a pleasure for sure. We already did all this. So just as a reminder, we have James Williams, who is in the chat. He is going to be our next guest speaker in 2 weeks, same time, Thursday at 1 p.m. So be sure to join us there. He is going to be talking more about federal level stuff. So it'll be a great transition from Elizabeth's presentation today. And then again, when it comes to action groups, we will be looking at your attendance today. So everyone who came and left, we have their attendance. We will be looking at who did take-home activities. We're going to start those up once we get some ideas going. And if you guys want to see anything in particular, please let us know. And make sure you sign up. The link is in the chat. Again, there are some leadership opportunities, whether you are an undergrad, graduate student, or faculty member. We are looking for all disciplines, all sets of expertises, and we would really appreciate it if you guys could sign up. So yeah, thank you all for joining, and we hope you have a very wonderful Friday tomorrow and eventually a fantastic weekend.
Real quick, Mike asked a question about how to translate his work. That's one of the goals of, this semester is learning how we can actually apply what you do in the lab and make a clear message. And then we're also working on science communication skills. So yes, definitely join an action group to continue to attend these, and we'll begin to address that a little bit more. But thank you for that question.
Yeah. The workshops, the best workshops that we will be having with Patrick, I think that will touch on that and be really awesome for translating your expertise to the public and to lawmakers who are not familiar with it.
That's why we formed the group. We're all feeling that frustration. Thank you guys. Have a wonderful afternoon.